Please welcome Nancy Green, this morning's moderator and Chief Design Officer, The Medicines Company, along with our 5 speakers.
Good morning, everybody. So it's your turn to have a conversation with our speakers who presented us a lot of interesting things to think about. If you think about human-centered design and the design of this conference, you are the humans at the center of the design. So please, provocateurs, will you stand up again? This is your tool, audience, to really get to one of our provocateurs and to ask them to ask a question. And if not, they'll have to ask their own questions. Thank you. Okay, so who's first? Yes.
The question is, can you talk about mass efforts to educate local designers, and specifically do these designers learn measurement strategies?
That's a great question. I think one of the core lessons that we learned and realities of working in places of limited resource, of course, is that there aren't necessarily a ton of programs for training designers. So in Rwanda, when I got there in 2006, there was no school of architecture. There was no licensing system for architects. There were 6 architects working in the country itself. So immediately we knew that we had to invest not only in training in the process of building, which is a key opportunity and often missed opportunity, but also investing in the system of training better builders. So the first School of Architecture started in 2009 by the government. The woman who led our team over there, Sierra Bainbridge, led the School of Architecture and really built a curriculum around measurement, what we call immersion, which is sort of diving deep into communities early on to ask the right questions. And then training what we might call high-impact architects and designers. And this year we've started a new school of design, what we're calling the African Design Center, which is bringing kind of the best designers from around the continent to train in Rwanda on these processes. And this new fellowship program is one that we see as an opportunity really to take these lessons that we're all asking and distribute them around, especially on the continent of Africa. We're going to see the the biggest building boom in the world in the next 50 years. Cities that haven't even existed or don't exist will be built, and along with that will be massive public health crises and environmental challenges if we're not thinking about the impact of design. And just a last data point, the entire continent of Africa has 1/4 of the amount of architects that are in Italy itself. 25,000 architects in the entire continent of Africa, where Italy has about 100,000. So the dearth of professional training programs, master's programs is huge, and we have to invest in that as well as a system level in order to address these bigger challenges.
Good question. Who's next? It's very bright here. Do I see a question over there?
I have a question for LaFond. Can you talk a little bit more about how design as a method was introduced and received by the more traditional public health program designers, and sort of the plus and minuses of that and what you experienced?
I think that I can fairly say that the public health implementers that were introduced to design drank the Kool-Aid. They loved it, right? And so much so that as our research went on, we thought like they'd been paid by somebody, right? It was an emotional experience for them. It was an emotional professional experience for them to have participated in the design process, and then to have formed those links and those partnerships and those relationships to, for example, the community health nurses. So the Grameen team didn't just do design once. They went back with the program and they asked for feedback from these nurses 5 times, and there were 5 iterations of the software program that went into it. Now, for software designers, you're like, yeah, we always do that. For public health programs, we don't do that. We usually implement and we finish and we evaluate. So the idea of over 18 months of time, going back and asking your partners, your end users, is this working? How would you like it? Can we make it better? Is something quite unique in a public health setting. So I would say in that case, it was a positive experience for them. In some cases, people that we interviewed said, it might have been a bit too much, right? Maybe we should have let it go for a bit, see how it evolved, and then measure it. So, you know, there was a lot of investment up front, a lot of labor involved in doing that constant feedback loop in the course of 18 months. And even the program manager said, well, you know, it could be that you wouldn't have the resources to be able to do that in every setting.
Hi. I'm going to ask Anne to reflect on something in one of her slides because I was quite curious about it. In one of your slides, you say design influence the implementer approach possibly too much. So hold that because I think that's I'm curious what that means. And then from the audience, and I think this is a general question for everybody. How have each of you, or perhaps more collaboratively and inclusively, measured the uptake of design strategies in the communities where you've been? In other words, you know, have you gone in and actually set the stage where communities can actually take on this tradition on their own without a design firm being at their side in the long haul?
Okay. In terms of the too much, I think from an evaluator standpoint that's used to looking at objective measures of performance of a health program, we found that the commitment to the end user input almost overshadowed any objective measures that we were bringing in, right? So we wanted to help them use data to influence the program design, but there was a lot of passion about just the end user and the end user experience. So I think in an evaluation setting, you need to find the balance between the two so that you're committed to that desirability part of the design process and making that part of your driver of uptake. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you've got objective measures of whether the program is performing well in any sense, not just in the uptake sense.
And the second part of the question?
So I think one of the challenges here, it's been raised a couple times, this question of designers entering later in a project cycle, and perhaps it's a missed opportunity in some cases, and perhaps there may be future opportunities to have that be something that is done up front. But one thing that raises is there's a whole bunch of different entry points into working in this space. Now, the biggest picture is that we're interested in poverty reduction. That's why I think a lot of people are working in different fields: public health, economics, business, design, academia, architecture. But those are different disciplines, each with their own lens for entering these challenges. Another whole category is government and public policy. And my team comes from the perspective, from the global health lens. So we're engineers and data scientists, but we are subservient to public health goals. And those are somewhat unambiguous in some cases and are often dictated by government and international policies and international funders. So I think it would be challenging to come up with a pure, unadulterated approach that focuses entirely on human-centered design from day one in a community without considering all those other levers, motivations, institutions that are influencing things. And they're not necessarily influencing things badly. I mean, it might be, I'm not sure that designers are the best people to go into a village and solve its problems. There's a whole bunch of other disciplines that are relevant to looking at those challenges, including, of course, the community. So to answer your question, or to not answer your question at all, I'm not sure there is necessarily a paradigm where there is, homegrown, human-centered design as a necessary outcome. That might be a good thing in some cases, in some places, but it's not necessarily the solution. It's one tool in a very multidisciplinary toolkit to try to address poverty.
I mean, I can answer. We do measure this, and I think there's two areas. If you go back to my 4 E's, direct and indirect, I think one of the ultimate impacts of a good architectural intervention is what we might call systems change or policy change. And a lot of the funders who've supported us, and we are a nonprofit 501c3, we're saying if you build a good hospital, and you prove it's better and it's cheaper and it's better designed than if you build 100 of them or 1,000 of them, that to us is impact. the kind of product design model. And we really pushed back. And I said, I don't think that's our impact model. It's not the replication of one. It's one really good example in architecture that can affect the whole system, to me, is how we affect change. And we've seen that in Rwanda, where we built this, kind of a prototype model of a hospital. The government then brought us in to rewrite the national standards and codes, so we're writing policy. And now we've been hired to build a new hospital, actually two, for the government with the new policy in mind. So we see that as a kind of long effect of architecture being a kind of a catalyst for changing the system. And that's let's say the direct. The indirect are also very clear. So in the communities themselves, methods of working and innovation in materiality and processes can also be replicated by the very folks that we're working with. So in each project, if we don't think about the method, the process of building, we also miss calculating all these other, let's say, ripple effects of architecture. It's bigger than just health outcomes. It has these systemic effects and these community effects. So the example in the Congo, for example, is, those folks are working with mud block construction. So we went in and we tested mud block construction with different types of palm oil mixes, and we found a highly more resilient block construction and that could resist water penetration better than what was typically made. And after testing and material testing, then we built with that. And now we're seeing those same masons using that method, right? And that is also a kind of effect on materiality and constructability. Earthquake-resistant building in northern Rwanda is necessary, but none of the buildings are earthquake-resistant. So if we introduce structural loading and care in the construction, then these buildings won't fall on people when the earthquake comes. So, those are also pieces of what architecture does, and it's why I think architecture is a useful and challenging discipline for this kind of role of design, because it pushes against just a single measurement. It has to be a complex ecosystem measurement and under various different, let's say, variables.
Can I answer? So it's challenging for a foundation because we are a step forward, from the impact in the community itself, but I think that we are working on really developing the field at large, so hopefully having the ripple effect that you're mentioning. And I think that as a technology company, what we are seeing is that our tools are more and more addressing what we call sort of the para workers, like the paramedicals, the people that go on the field that might not be the experts. We saw that design tools before were really for engineers and architects, and more we see a sort of democratization of these tools so that it can be used by anyone on the field. And so our hope is that the community can pick up, and we have worked actually with Mass Design on sending an Autodesk team directly there, training on the software, the people that are working directly on the field. I think we still need to have some sort of feedback loop to see how this is picking up. But our hope is that this sort of how we build the field at large to have the impact.
I have one here for Heather, and one that I'd like to use moderator's prerogative to direct to Heather. So it's a two-part for Heather. First, what is the role of human-centered design in informing and interacting with policymakers, as well as with responsible governance? And then secondly, would you describe what you described as the future of Catapult? Would you say that that's accurately conveyed by the term service design? What does that term mean for you?
I'd love to throw that first question right back at you, Chelsea.
I didn't write this question. I didn't plant that one.
So I'm going to try. I'll start with the first one because I don't have a good answer. And actually, Chelsea, who asked the question, would be a wonderful person to answer it for me. So I actually met Chelsea a few months ago, and I don't know if you know this, but it's actually through the conversation with you that my brain started thinking about ways that we could not just build a tool and let it sit there, but how do you actively cultivate and use the information that comes from it to influence change further up the line. So Chelsea's from the Public Policy Lab. If you haven't looked into your schedule just yet, Catapult isn't really in the realm of public policy. This is our first, I guess, foray or turn going about even working with government. In all of our other 54 examples or projects that I mentioned earlier, we've never, ever once dealt with a government entity. So the work on Navajo is the first time where we've been started thinking about public policy and how that is part of the project scope, and then two, thinking about ourselves as creating a project where the intended result is to influence policy reform. So I apologize to whoever asked that question, because my brain isn't quite there yet, and I'd suggest that you have a conversation with Chelsea about that. Can you remind me of the second question?
Whether or not you think service design
Yeah.
is the right term to describe where you think you're going and what you think about that.
It is, and more recently we've started calling ourselves a product and service design firm, because particularly in our space, in the product space, when you're talking about the types of customers that have been on the screen all morning, products are still way too expensive for most folks that we're designing for. And so most of the clients that we work for are integrating them into some service of some sort. Now we're still brought in to design the product, but we have to be able to influence and help shape the service model as well in order to address the affordability piece. And without affordability, then what's the point of all of this? So yeah, to clarify, I've been emphasizing the product piece, but we do put ourselves out there as a product and service design firm for that reason.
I think we have time for one last question.
Okay, so this is a question for Michael. How do you translate the jobs that are created in the construction of a building to long-term employment or income generation for residents? But I also think it's a question related to research, which is how do we ever get enough money from funders to follow the results and the impacts of our interventions beyond some relatively short period of performance? So I hope you can answer both.
Yeah, thank you for the second one.
I'm trying to be provocative.
We all like that.
We've benefited from the largesse of many foundations, including Autodesk. But as I said in my last slide, I think we are at the beginning of this, and we desperately need to build the field. We need investment in measurement. I mean, design is a hypothesis. Architecture is a hypothesis of a solution to a series of problems or a problem. Once you build it, then you begin measuring. But most architects, first of all, barely have the fee to design the thing. Most of the money goes directly to the construction of the building, let alone the measurement after they hand the keys over. And so we've had, as a nonprofit, we've been able to garner grants to actually build a team of researchers to start to measure. But even the results I'm showing you today have taken years and without a lot of support to do so. So I think there is a desperate need to do that, and there needs more than just internal evaluation, needs external evaluation as well. In terms of jobs, I was actually excited to hear that Lori is a labor economist. The question of how we measure the types of jobs and the quality of jobs and employment that architecture in particular produces is a question that I have that's not just relevant to Africa or these low resource settings. It's relevant to our country here. Right? Architecture is an amazing and long-term catalyst for economic development in a place, of course, right? Infrastructure investments. And unless we have good measurements to articulate what exactly, what type of job, the quality of job, is it just labor that's, let's say low-skilled labor? Is it high-skilled labor? Is it local labor? Are we importing labor? These are the questions that are not necessarily clear when we decide to pick a certain material. And one of the conclusions that we've found in architecture is when you pick a material, it has a long trail of labor impact. And so the questions around the controversies around people dying in the Middle East and on construction projects because they haven't thought about the labor equation, these are the responsibility of the designer. In fact, the decisions that we make on material have an impact on people's lives and the types of jobs that are required to extract that material. And so there is this big political and social ecosystem for every decision we make. So reintroducing, or let's say investing in measurement, is also about revealing the kind of substructures that make up our built world, and that designers have actually a lot of power in deciding. So even though we're given the brief, build this building or design this building, the decisions we make at that moment in time have an effect on people's lives. And if we're fundamentally going to restructure the power relationships of our built environment, of our society, we have to understand the impacts of those decisions on, like, well down the line on people's lives. And we do not have the tools to measure that. And there is not a consistent framework in order to articulate how one compares to the other. And so it's necessary and a fundamental piece of us articulating the impact of our work on the communities we serve.
Thank you. Thank you to the speakers. That was incredible. And thank you to the audience. Great questions.
Thank you.